Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome to Books That Make You. I'm Desiree Duffy, and we are talking about books that make you know what it's like to meet a serial killer. Yeah. Books written by journalists and news people, they tend to be some of the most interesting. These people are often on the front lines, experiencing the stories you read in the paper and see on the news as part of their real life. They can get close to the action and get to know the players intimately and uncover aspects to stories like no one else. They can even come face to face with a serial killer and live to tell about it. Ken Davis is a multi-Emmy award-winning producer, writer, and on-air reporter. He's worked for all of the major TV networks in news and entertainment, beginning as the nation's youngest TV news anchorman. And he went on to have wild adventures with everyone from superstars to serial killers during his 4-decade career. Now, in his memoir, In Bed with Broadcasting, he takes this backstage pass into the world of broadcasting, and it is just chock full of exclusive behind-the-scenes adventures with the famous as well as the infamous. This is an unput-downable book, and it has stories about Mae West, Phil Spector, Walter Cronkite, Barack Obama, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Henry Fonda, Bill Cosby, and many, many more public figures like that serial killer. But we'll give you the skinny on that a little later. Right now, I would like to introduce to you our guest, Ken Davis. Welcome.
I'm honored to be here, Desiree, and especially with such a wonderful promoter of books in the literary world and the importance of books, and you do a lot to make this world a better place. So it's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. Wow. I like that. That's quite a compliment there. So let's start at the top. In Bed with Broadcasting. That sounds rather salacious. Can you tell me about the title and how you came up with it?
I sure will. It came out, ironically, the exact same month as the Me Too movement took off. And no, it is not about the casting couches of Hollywood and all the strange going-ons there. It's actually because the industry was my mistress. And anyone who succeeds in broadcasting, or most folks, and I'm speaking from a male point of view, would understand that, because I would do anything for her. But she could be exciting and glamorous on the outside, but cold and calculating on the inside. And as you mentioned, she took me down some strange alleyways, including coming face to face with a serial killer. I had a gun pointed to my head by, in another story, Phil Spector to be exact, came across a dead movie star. So it's, some people say journalists are a little nuts, but we're certainly excitement junkies. It's not a dull profession.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. That's what's intriguing, is this becomes part of your everyday life.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you have these stories and you put them in this book, and it's a great read for us because we know the front-facing part of the story, what the news tells us. We understand what we read in the paper. But when you get that, that intimate perspective, you're right there looking down on everything. You've got a bird's eye view of all of the players. You know what's happening so much differently than what we do.
When you wake up in the morning, you don't know what to expect. I mean, and a perfect example would be a Saturday back in 1982, I think it is. I got up thinking I was going to produce some stories with Charles Osgood. And I don't know if you remember him, the very congenial, mellow, laid-back host of Sunday Morning.
Sure.
He was on radio for many years. And Charles and I were simply going to drive out to Riverside, California, and interview this woman named Nan Graham, I believe. But she was the female in the pitchfork, this famous painting of the man and the woman standing out in the field and looking very stern, and it was somewhat of a famous
American
painting.
Gothic.
There you go.
Yeah.
I call myself a journalist. I call myself a
Not
writer.
an art critic.
No, but not an art critic. Anyway, on our way to it, we suddenly get this call that the MGM Grand in Las Vegas is fully engulfed in flames. And Charles and I I take him off the freeway, I take him back to TV City where CBS is located. His thing is not hard news, so he was going to fly back to New York, and I was within a half an hour on a Learjet to Las Vegas. where we spent the next day covering this story that 82 people lost their lives, and you're dealing suddenly with crying relatives of victims and all this. So this is how quickly it can change. And then 24 hours later, my Mae West story occurred, so which I'll get to in a minute. But it is a perfect example how things can change in a heartbeat, and you always need a good supply of blood pressure pills and a change of clothes.
Right.
When you're dealing with network news, yeah.
Sure. Well, being an adrenaline junkie helps in this profession.
It does.
So tell us then, okay, take that deeper dive. You mentioned Mae West. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. This is less than 24 hours after covering the MGM Grand Fire, and I get into in my book, In Bed with Broadcasting. I am recovering psychologically and physically from what I've just been through, and I casually pick up the phone at CBS News in Los Angeles, and the strange voice says to me, "A legend has died." And I said, "Who is this?" He says, "Doesn't matter. CBS was her favorite network." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Mae West." And then he hung up. Now, people born after 1970 or whatever may not realize how big a star Mae West was. She was the second highest paid person in the country behind William Randolph Hearst. She basically saved Paramount Pictures. She discovered Cary Grant. So she was a lot more than just this sexy woman with a sexy walk you saw with W.C. Fields. She was a major star. And then back then, in the 80s, of course, she had passed her prime, but she was a staple of late night television. Anyway, so I'm sitting on a major exclusive, and this is the days before you know who's calling on the other line. And so I didn't want to make a bunch of phone calls and tip off the competition, but I did know where Mae lived, and she lived in this old apartment building called the Ravenswood in the Hancock Park area of Los Angeles, a luxurious old apartment building. So I put my assistant took over my position. I jumped in my car, and I simply drove down to the Ravenswood, walk in the door, talk to the concierge, who was I said, "I'm with CBS News, and I understand Mae West has passed away." And he said, "Sir, I cannot comment on our residents here, but I would certainly know if Mae West had passed away." He was very cocky. So I said, "Thank you." And I walked out the door thinking, I'm just not going to take his word for it. And you'll have to read it in the book. But I snuck back into the building. I figured she lived in the penthouse. Mae wouldn't live any other place.
Right.
Went up to the penthouse, knocked on the door, and before it was over, Mae West and I were alone in a dark room. She was in a sleeping bag and had left this world. And it's a very strange story, but it's also a love story about the man who lived with her. So, and this is all within a 24-hour period, starting with American Gothic, jumping to the MGM Grand, jumping to Mae West. So journalism is an interesting, the book is actually written like an adventure novel, not just, gee, I met this person and I met that person, this or that. I try to make it involving the mistress that I would do anything for her, the ups and downs in the life of a journalist. And there's exciting times, there's funny times. I interviewed the world's smartest chimpanzee, which is one of my favorite interviews. So and there are downright funny stories where I made the mistake of, I guess I can say this now, my mom's not real proud of it, but smoking marijuana right before I did an interview with the police.
Oh, what?
Now I'm not a regular marijuana smoker, and I wasn't back then, but the camera crew and I thought our night was over, and the sound man said, "Hey, do you want to try to smoke this?" And I said, "Sure." And suddenly we get a call. We have to go interview the chief of police in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Bad timing
yeah,
there,
but he laughed at it, and I think he knew it. And so ever since then, I've tried to stay sober, but never a dull moment.
Right.
And
So Phil Spector.
Yes.
He held a gun to your head?
To my head.
And that was before the infamous...
Yes, it was 10 years before the infamous murder in Alhambra. And the Phil Spector story is I began my career as a disc jockey. I jokingly say Coconino County cut up California can, cranking out the cream of the crop on KEOS.
You're good at that.
I was. Okay. Anyway, I idolized Phil Spector's music. You've Lost That Love and Feeling. I'm going to show my age here. Imagine by the Beatles, and then going way back to the girl groups, the Ronettes, and all these different things. Phil Spector wrote or produced about 40 top 10 songs, and I loved his music. So in the late 70s, I'm producing the news at a local station here in Los Angeles, and turned out Phil was a big fan of the show. And also he was a fan of the anchor team. And he called up one night and invited them up to his mansion. And this is when he lived in an 18-room mansion in Beverly Hills. The murders actually occurred when he moved to a castle in Alhambra. Anyway, after the show, one night we went up to his mansion, and it turned out to be going up almost every night for 6 months. And we would go up to Phil's house. I'm in my 20s and enthralled by living in this luxurious world. Met John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen. So, it was exciting. And Phil was okay at the beginning. But as the time went on, he began to drink more and more. Mm. And one night, I invited two of my friends over to meet him. And he suddenly became extremely paranoid, pulled a gun on a limo driver, pulled a gun on my friends. He thought they were from the CIA all of a sudden.
Whoa.
And then he turns at me and points the gun about an inch from my head and said, I was responsible for bringing the CIA over there. And that's how chapter 2 ends. And you'll have to see if I survived.
Well, you're here.
I'm here, so I must have survived. But I obviously felt horrible when I heard what happened.
Knowing about the murders too, like sure. In retrospect, how did that make you feel once the murders came to light? Because you were in virtually a similar situation.
Exactly. I was near an assignment desk in a newsroom when the teletype came across that a woman had been shot in Alhambra, California by Harvey Philip Specter, and I knew that was his real name. And I instantly, and there was witnesses that I said, I know what happened. And what it was is he was drunk, and it was an accident. I'm convinced. I obviously wasn't there. He was showing off with his gun. He was very insecure. He was only 5'4". She was wanting to leave. He would lock the door when you go inside his house. Her handbag and her body, unfortunately, were found, right at the front door. I think she was trying to leave. And I think he was flashing the gun, trying to show off like he did with me. Mm-hmm. And then that's why you don't play with firearms. I think it accidentally went off.
Right.
And so he's serving 18 years to life and will probably die in prison. Mm-hmm. But an interesting story. Also in that chapter, I have a little bit of fun. If you're into music, I get into this gang of folks called the Wrecking Crew that literally it's their music on about 80 to 100 top 20 pop songs of the past 40 years, commercials, TV, all kinds of things, movies. And I got to know these guys, got to sing alongside Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen. And,
oh, cool.
And so anyway, and I get into fun stories like, the real meaning behind certain songs like Save the Last Dance for Me. Uh-huh. So the book goes all over the place. It's both entertaining, it's scary, and hopefully it's fun.
Yeah, it's a great summer read. And I do like the way that you've named your chapters too, because they are all inspired by songs.
Thank you for noticing that.
Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, that was fun. I've always loved music, and like the Hillside Strangler is Stranglers in the Night. So.
All right, so the cat's out of the bag. This is the serial killer that you met. Tell me about that.
Another lovely guy.
Only the best people, huh?
True story. My 94-year-old mother told me later, I sure am glad I didn't know all these stories back then. Because we can laugh now.
Right.
We can laugh now. I was working for the local CBS television station in Los Angeles, and in the late 70s, when you were still in your teens or younger, the city was under siege by the Hillside Stranglers. And every week, sometimes twice in a week, women would be found on hillsides, their bodies left out. That obviously the criminals wanted the police to find them, and they were taunting the police. And I start out the chapter saying, Los Angeles is one of the largest cities in the world. It's 72 suburbs in search of a city. But during the Hillside Strangler siege, it felt like a little town in Iowa because everyone could relate and everyone was concerned that the next victim they would know or who would it be. I was giving female coworkers rides to work because they were afraid to be by themselves. People were afraid, women alone, to be stopped by the police because they thought the Hillside Strangler was perhaps acting like impersonating a police officer. Mm-hmm. This goes on, but late one night, they arrested one of the Hillside Stranglers up in the state of Washington. And he claimed that he worked with his cousin, who was a guy named Angelo Bono, who lived down here in Glendale, California. But it wasn't enough information to get Angelo arrested. The first cousin is arrested, but the second cousin is out and about and working at his paint shop or auto shop in Glendale. Mm-hmm. Well, being the excitement junkie and a little crazy myself, I decided to go knock on the door of his house. Aren't I smart, huh? Actually, I was with another reporter. I wasn't that stupid that I was by myself. This is late on a Saturday night. He wasn't there, but we figured out, or a neighbor tipped us off to the fact that he was down the street at the local watering hole, which was a rundown bar. Mm-hmm. So my buddy and I just...
So you went to meet a drunk serial killer.
Yeah, we're full of testosterone. What can go wrong, No weapons. We're crazy. You got journalists get the excitement for the lead story or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Call me crazy. You may. You won't be the first. We walk into the bar. They immediately turn on us. Everyone in the bar, because they were all friends with Angelo. They were all thinking the media was out to get him, using phrases like fake news. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. This is way back then. But I spot Angelo in the back of the room and sneaking out the back door. And it doesn't want anything to do with us. Well, my friend and I decide we're going to follow him. And this is now about midnight in Glendale, California, and you can read about it in the book. Mm-hmm. We're going up and down these side streets, and it's dark, and there's some streets with no street lights, this or that. Angelo finally stops his car, and there's no one else around, and walks up to the car. You'll have to read about it in the book what happens.
Oh.
But I'm face to face, and he threatens us, and pretends or looks like he's going for a gun. Advised us to get the hell out of there, and we did.
And you did. You took his advice.
And then Angelo, 2 days later, was arrested for murder, and for 13 murders, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
So that was my...
And that was an unusual case, too, the fact that they worked together.
Exactly. Now, talking about serial, that's extremely rare. That's like 2% of serial killers work as a team. Generally, they work solo. But police officers and those of us playing Columbo figured out that there probably was 2 of them because the way the bodies were moved. But what was strange about that whole story, and I get into it in the book, that the bodies were all, most of them cleaned, like they were medically clean. So we were figuring as a doctor that they had to be 2 people to leave. They'd leave them out in public places like Forest Lawn Cemetery. And it was just taunting the public on freeway off-ramps. And it is extremely unusual. But as I said in the book, one of them, I don't think the word is enjoyed, but his thing was seeing somebody being hurt, and then the other one seeing them being killed. And neither of them would have done it by themselves, but together they became a killing machine. And 2 men who figured they were wronged by women. And, I'm not in favor generally of the death penalty, but if anybody deserved to breathe poisonous gas, it's the Hillside Stranglers.
They probably, yeah. Now, in working in your profession too, I'm sure that you have insights to not only serial killers, but criminal minds in general.
You do.
You start to learn their patterns and how they think and how they work.
Very good question. You're asking these are excellent questions. Much like a police officer or a detective, yes, you do to learn. You meet people. One of the hardest things for me to learn, if I can be blunt, I'm actually started out as a very innocent person.
We all did.
No, I know, and I still may, but that there are people in this world with literally no conscience and narcissists, and it's still hard for me to understand. I come from a very loving family, and so you have to learn to think like they do, which is so foreign to how you think, or like, if you're a decent human being, how could a person go out, and take young lives and this or that? So you're exactly right. And that is actually one of the fun parts of it to try, or the intellectually entertaining parts of it, to put yourself in their brain and what would they do? And oftentimes, you're on the money.
Yeah.
On the Hillside Stranglers, I early on predicted it was 2 of them. And my prediction was one owed the other one something. It turned out they were relatives, but there had to be some connection there than just 2 guys.
Right. Like you said, they fed off of each other.
Exactly.
There's a little bit of a yin-yang thing going on where they complemented each other.
Exactly.
It worked for them.
And then in addition to that, one was about 10 years older, so one was the leader, so the other one looked up to him. And, it turned out to be, so much of it turned out to be true. And that's been in other cases. I have been fooled on occasion. I once was interviewing an individual from Japan. Japanese tourist was shot and killed in Hollywood, and it kind of shook up the tourism industry. That for some reason that caught the public's eye. That is it unsafe to visit Hollywood? And then it was starting to, and in Japan it was a huge story. I interviewed her husband, and he actually brought me to tears. Talking about his wife, and it was through an interpreter. Later turned out he had her killed. And so I'm not always right. I'm not always right.
Yeah.
And then there's pleasurable stories that mean so much. For example, the I did the final interview with Henry Fonda.
Yes, tell me about that,
And-
because
okay.
that's very bittersweet.
It was a special night. It was Oscar night when On Golden Pond was up for Best Picture, and the late actor Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn were up for Best Actor and Best Actress. And I was working for CBS Network, and I always love covering the Oscars. You get to put on great clothes, pretty people, great food.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun night. However, that night, my assignment was to go hang out in front of Henry Fonda's house because he had heart disease and was unable to go to the Oscars. And they were thinking, just in case he happened to win, maybe, he'll talk to us. Well, it was raining harder. It was one of the hardest rainstorms in Los Angeles history. It was pouring down. I'm sitting there playing Crazy Eights with my 81-year-old cameraman. No, actually, it was probably 60, but he seemed 81 to me. And it was going to be a boring night. I decided to take a break and walk up to the mansion. The rains had stopped for a moment, looking through the iron gates. And to my left, I see this a smaller home, and then to my right, I see this huge mansion where I picture Henry Fonda and his wife are cuddled in bed watching the Oscars. The Oscars hadn't started yet, getting ready to watch the Oscars. Mm-hmm. Suddenly in the dark, I hear this female voice say, "May I help you?" And I jumped, even though it was a female soft voice. Turned out it was Mrs. Fonda. And Shirley Fonda, a lovely woman, and she took pity on us out in the rain, invited us into their guest house.
Aww.
And yeah, she was just a real sweetheart. And then she sent over her housekeeper, Maria, with hot chocolate and cookies. So we're out of the rain. We're watching the Oscars. We know Henry's in the house next door with his wife. And then it gets to first Best Actress, and Kate Hepburn wins. Mm-hmm. And everybody's excited. She's in On Golden Pond. But it occurred to me, what if Henry doesn't win?
Yeah.
And then it comes up, and sure enough, Henry Fonda wins. And then the other media starts showing up outside. Then Jane Fonda shows up. For some reason, she was with Diana Ross. To give her father the Oscar, and we're thinking there's no way he's going to talk to us. Yeah. And we're about ready to leave, and suddenly Shirley comes up and knocks on the door, and the other media are locked out because of the gate, and invites us in. And we go in, and I interview Henry Fonda, sadly on his deathbed, but he says some interesting things about Katharine Hepburn, about his daughter, and what it meant to him to star in this movie with his daughter. And it just brought tears to my eyes. And then, holding his Oscar, his hands shaking, and we said our farewells, and as I say in the book, I told the rest of the media they might as well go home because he wasn't going to be giving any more interviews, and I didn't know how true that was because shortly after that he passed away.
Wow.
But those are special moments, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote a book, that there are so many things I want to remember for posterity and for my family to know, and I think others would be interested. So it's not all guns to the head and
that's what I love about the book. It is a mixture of stories. You've got the good, you've got the bad, you've got stuff that's heartwarming and funny. And
thank you. It's actually there's three story arcs. Mm-hmm. I'm supposed to be a man of words. The interesting and fascinating people and places I've been and met. Mm-hmm. The rise and fall of journalism. I talk about that. Mm-hmm. In one of the chapters is Walter Cronkite and I go out for a night on the town, and Walter really lays it out to me what he thinks about the world of news. It just opened my eyes to so many things.
What year was that?
This was the 2 weeks after he stepped down. Mm-hmm. It was 1983.
And what do you think he would say today?
He would not be happy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Walter Cronkite and I went out to this. It's a funny story, and it's a little long to get into, but it was kind of a dive bar in Hollywood called the Formosa Cafe, and he wanted to go to some place where nobody would recognize him. Mm-hmm. And so there I am suddenly sitting there having drinks with the man, who says, "That's the way it is." Walter, 2 weeks before, had left the anchor desk, and he told me the real reason why he did, but no one could quite understand. He was at the top of the ratings. He was at the top of his game. He was replaced by Dan Rather. But more importantly, he talked to me about the news business, and he says, it's not so important. The most important thing is, will it sell, not what it is, in terms of talking about news. He blamed the TV show in a lighthearted way, but said the TV show 60 Minutes, because it showed that you can make a lot of money with news. 60 Minutes gets, and back then had, tremendous ratings. And so it was a big moneymaker for CBS. So they could charge a lot for commercials. Local stations around the country, news used to be a public service, mm-hmm. where it was simply, to untainted, get out the facts, help society, and not to make money. Now it's a circus. And no local news has discovered, that's why they're on at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., that it's all about ratings, which is very sad. And I do not think he'd be pleased at all with what we have today in the news business. And I actually, in the book, come up with ideas to restore credibility to journalism. And I don't care if you're right wing, left wing, whatever you are. I mean, what happened to the days of Walter Cronkite when it was down the middle and it's just the facts, and it's untainted and it's uncolored? I mean, Walter even said to me, my kids don't know how I vote. That's how he kept, when I was first at CBS, we were not allowed to have political bumper stickers on our cars in case someone would say, oh, they have a political slant. I mean, you truly learn to be as objective as you can, although we're not all 100% objective because our experiences are different. But I actually write in the book, I have some ideas. I call it a code of ethics that I wish journalists would follow. And I'll just read you a couple of them.
Okay.
Cover, write, and present every story with the care I would want if the story were about me. Assume there are at least one other side or version to every story. Assume the viewer is as smart and as caring and as good a person as I think I am. Assume the same about all people with whom I report. I propose in the book that much like attorneys have to pass the bar, you'll see weathercasters call a degree in meteorology, but anybody can be a journalist. If they have a cell phone, they can call themselves a journalist.
Citizen journalist.
Exactly. Why not have and come up with a fancy name that can be journalogists or something, where they have to pass a code of ethics and they have to go in front of a board, and then people, vote them on, vote them off, but you have to go through some very, very specific training, because the truth is, I also write this in the book, that honest journalism and democracy rise and fall together. If I may read a real quick part from the book.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll just history is littered with the politically well-connected actively discrediting the press in order to maintain control of the masses. When a credible news media isn't there to act as a spotlight and disinfectant, we give away our power as a people. Our forefathers held this truth close to their hearts. It's the very reason why freedom of the press is in the First Amendment. And then I also write about, if I had my way, television would be more PBS and less BS. So it's not all highfalutin talk, but there is a difference today with cable television.
Well, there are shows that claim to be news. They even have news within the name, and they really aren't news, and that's a disservice to the public.
It is.
And there are people who would rather not have to think. They don't want to hear something that's very straightforward, because then they have to decide. They would rather have somebody have the emotion and the hype kind of infused into whatever the quote unquote story is, because then that gives them an emotional reaction. At least that's the way I see it. And they live for that emotional reaction. They want, for whatever reason, this tribalism. They want to take sides. They look at it like a sporting event almost. And that's where I get really scared and concerned for society in general, because I do believe that the news and the media has a service. It's the fourth estate, and it is that for a reason. And that's something that we have in America that I think is one of the greatest things that we have, because we do have the media there as a form of checks and balances for our government and for our leaders. And when suddenly we start to experience a world where that is being eroded and the trust in the media is going away, that to me is just really scary.
It's very scary, and I couldn't agree with you more. I agree with everything you said there. Leaders going back to Stalin and Hitler have used offshoots and even in words like fake news. And more specifically, Stalin used the phrase enemy of the people. I have known journalists that have died on the job. I've known, been in a lot of newsrooms. I've never been in a cable newsroom, but personal politics are rarely discussed. It just was unseemly too. It's not our job to do that. But once again, I've not been inside some of these so-called news places. There are legitimate news people out there, and I totally agree with you. People they go to their social circles, they go even to their clergy. They hear what they want to hear, and it's a lot easier to do that. And like you said, it's become sport. and it is sad. And this is both the left and the right. It's not just one specific area. And so I hate hearing phrases like this is fake news or enemy of the people when I've known people that have died on the job. I've known people that wouldn't do that. And it sets up, if the public doesn't trust what they're reading because somebody else tells them not to, how are we going to save democracy?
Yeah.
They rise and fall together. Anyway, I wish we didn't even have commercials on television news. Back in the old days, they didn't.
Right.
I wish children's programming didn't have commercials. I wish instead of 30-second political spots, there were, engagements, debates, and different things. I know it sounds like a world that's gone, but I hope not. And I also fear the end of newspapers, because newspapers requires you to think and goes deeper into stories that TV news never can. And it is so critical to our freedom.
Yeah. And that's the thing, too, is a lot of times people just want the surface.
Yes.
They just want the headlines. They want 140 characters that they can read on Twitter or social media. And they will react to a headline, and that headline might be twisted, distorted. But that's what they're going to listen to, and that's what is going to resonate with them.
And one thing I've learned in news, sadly, the world is full of people that will take advantage of you, and that take advantage of ignorance. And if we're not there to say what's a con job and what's not, that's scary times.
Yeah. The moral of the story: be informed. Don't be ignorant. Right?
I totally agree. And frankly, maybe it's just me. I find it fun to be informed. I mean, maybe I was just born with curiosity, but it's like, use it or you lose it. It's a wonderful world out there if you open your eyes.
Yeah. Well, and I think being a journalist, that's what drives it, right? That
right.
natural curiosity. Okay, tell us really quick, In Bed with Broadcasting, where can people find it? Where can they find you on social media, etc.?
After this, they may find me in jail. No, KenDavisWriter.com is by far the best. That's writer, KenDavisWriter.com. That's both the website and my Twitter handle. KenDavisWriter.com. It's In Bed with Broadcasting. It's also on Amazon. I invite you at least to go to that page to check it out, because there's a lot more stories we didn't get to. But I try to have fun with it, and I try to make it readable and apply across the board. Plus, it has a serious side as well.
Yeah, it's a great read. And again, it's a perfect book for traveling, or a summer book, a summer read, a beach book. It really, you flip through it very, very quickly. So thank you again for writing it, and thank you for joining me on the show. I appreciate it.
And thanks for all you do, Desiree.
You are most welcome. You are so welcome. Once again, my name is Desiree Duffy, and thank you for being with us today on Books That Make You. And you can find out more on our website. That is booksthatmakeyou.com. And you can also follow on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, enjoy all the books that make you who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.